PHI 203. You're welcome to study session 6. Moral responsibility and determination. In this study session, we will discuss the issue of moral responsibility. We will also examine the implications of the idea of determinism on moral responsibility. Learning outcomes. When you have studied this session, you should be able to 1. Explain moral responsibility. 2. Explain the word moral excusability. 3. Discuss types of determinism. Moral responsibility. Sometimes, while making moral judgments, we are influenced or even compelled to judge one way or the other based on our understanding of the circumstances surrounding the issue at hand. For example, we blame people for our misdeed when we clearly understand that they could do otherwise. However, on the other hand, we overlook people's faults when we understand that they were compelled to do what they did or that they were not totally in control of their choice at the time. The idea of moral responsibility. When a person is taken responsible for something, it means that the act was performed by the person or that the person is answerable for the act. Generally, responsibility can be in two forms. These are prospective responsibility and retrospective responsibility. Prospective responsibility involves things that are up to one to attend to or roles that one is expected to perform. Examples of prospective responsibility are the responsibilities of a mother towards a son or the responsibilities of a teacher towards his students. It is therefore obvious from the foregoing explanation that moral responsibility is not a form of prospective responsibility. Retrospective responsibility, on the other hand, is that which involves what we have done as well as the effect engendered by our actions, errors, and oversights. This is the type of responsibility under which moral responsibility is. Responsibility is a very important concept to the whole idea of morality because of its important implications for accountability and punishment. Moral excusability. Moral excusability refers to the idea that given certain conditions, people can be held responsible for wrong decisions or conduct. In other words, under certain circumstances, we tend to overlook holding people responsible for wrong moral actions. In another respect, moral excusability is a means of explaining a fault or an offense away with the purpose of making people understand the reason why we did what we did wrong or the reason why we could not do the right thing expected of us. Moral excusability is closely related to the issue of moral responsibility, and a look at it will enhance our understanding of moral responsibility. Reasons why people can be excused are four. According to some ethicists, these reasons include ignorance of an action's consequences. It has been observed that the first reason why we excuse people when they do wrong thing. Take 2. When they do wrong is if they are not aware of the possible consequences of their moral actions. If people are not knowledgeable about the negative consequences which their actions are likely to bring about, we do not usually hold them responsible because we cannot expect them in such a circumstance to prevent such consequences that they are ignorant of. Presence of constraints. On another note, we excuse people when we are aware of the fact that there were certain constraints which prevented them from doing the right thing. In case we know that people cannot help what they have done, we excuse them and do not hold them responsible for what they have done wrong. Constraints can be internal or external. External constraints are those restraints that come from outside forces or factors. For example, if a gateman leads an assassin to his master's bedroom because the latter threatened to kill him if he refuses to do so, we might not blame the gateman for helping the assassin locate the master. However, if the gateman freely chooses to help his master's killers find him, then it cannot excuse his action. Internal constraints, on the other hand, refer to a compulsion that comes from within a person rather than from someone else. Such constraints are usually in forms of cravings, intense desires, obsessions, and inclinations to do what is wrong. This shows that the person in question is helpless in the face of the control which compels her to do what she does. For example, if we know that someone is pyromaniac, we cannot hold the person responsible for setting a field on fire. This is because we have the understanding that although what compels the person comes from within, yet she cannot help the act or do otherwise. This is different from the case of someone who planned everything well before setting a place on fire. Presence of uncontrollable circumstances. Another reason for excusability in morality is that which involves events or circumstances that are beyond a person's control. We might not be justified in holding people responsible for a wrongdoing if we are aware that the events leading to their action are beyond their control. An example is if someone is involved in an automobile accident, has been ill, or is restrained by some unforeseen circumstances. For instance, if Ada is not able to pay a debt because robbers struck her place the night before the day she promised to pay back the money. This, however, is different from a case of someone who deliberately refuses to pay back the money she owes at when she promised to pay. Absence of alternatives. If we are aware of the fact that people do not have the opportunity, the skill, or the ability to do the right thing, we usually excuse their wrong actions. Put differently, if we know that doing what we consider to be morally right requires certain special skills and abilities which someone lacks, we cannot blame the person for not doing the right thing. For example, if a sick child suddenly begins to convulse or faint while only a young sister is around, we might not be justified if we blame the girl for not reviving the sick sister. The obvious reason for the lack of justification for blaming the little girl is that she lacks the skill or the competence to revive the sister. This is, however, different from the case of a medical expert who refuses to do anything to help the dying child. Determinism and morality. Determinism is an idea in philosophy which holds that everything in the universe is controlled by causal laws or laws of nature. From this position, we can, therefore, infer that every event in the world can be predicted, if only one knows the prior conditions or the antecedent of such an event. Put differently, we can infer from the idea of determinism that every event, including human cognition, decision, and action, are causally determined by certain universal laws. What this idea suggests is that human beings cannot but act in a particular way, or that they cannot decide to do other than what they have been conditioned to do. This idea, however, has very serious implications for the idea of moral responsibility and moral agency in ethics. An implication of this view is that we are not justified in praising people for a laudable act or condemning people for a wrong moral action which they do. This is because when we hold people responsible either for a good action or a bad one, we do so from a general assumption that such an action emanated entirely from them. Moral responsibility can be seen to be incompatible with determinism. Many people believe that in the absence of the constraints that we have discussed, any other unclear reason behind a person's action cannot be reckoned with. Determinists are of the idea, however, that our common belief in free will is false and illusory. For ethical determinists, just like we are not in control of physical natural events like earthquakes, tsunamis, hurricanes, and typhoons, we are not likewise in control when it comes to moral decisions and actions. They hold further that the fact that we do not always admit this fact emanates from our desire as humans to always want to believe we are in control of situations rather than being controlled. In an attempt to consider moral responsibility in relation to determinism, three positions emerged to explain the likely relation between the two ideas. The three positions are hard determinism, soft determinism, and compatibilism. Hard determinism. Hard determinism is the view that everything in the universe is being controlled by certain natural laws, and that this does not give room for a free choice of moral actions. According to hard determinists, the reason why we think we are free to make choices is because we are ignorant, because we cannot predict what happens next. We think we can actually make things happen. For hard determinists, the fact that we think this way does not make it correct that we can really make things happen. If we can study nature more closely, we will understand how things work in nature, and we will thereby be able to make accurate predictions of events and moral actions. Hard determinists explain that rather than choices emanating from our free will or volition, such things as our genetic inheritance and society or environmental compels us to act the way we do. For them, this line of reasoning is correct because there is no contrary evidence to disprove it. Hard determinism is a position in ethics raises a number of problems. In the first place, hard determinism tolerates crimes, and this, to any right-thinking person, is absurd. How can we say a robber, an assassin, or a terrorist has done something wrong if we are aware of the fact that he has carried out the bidding of some natural laws which he cannot possibly disobey? On the other hand, hard determinism, if true, shows that humans are or animals. For example, consider this conversation. You bastard, you left all the windows and doors of my house open and tipped off Jimmy's nightstick that I was away. Now all my stuffs has been nicked. That sounds like moral determinism to me. Do you believe that Jimmy's nightstick is not an autonomous moral agent, but a mere automaton whose actions are the inevitable, unconscious consequences of mine? Well, if you think he's such an idiot, I suggest you tell him so. Here he comes now. By the way, I told him you shagged his wife. Self-determinism. Self-determinism is the position of hard determinism. Self-determinism agrees with hard determinism that events in nature are causally determined by certain laws of nature, which makes it extremely difficult for things to happen other than they have happened, or other than they have been determined to happen. Its claims are, however, different from hard determinism in that it holds that humans are not included in this determinism. It is of the view that although all other things in nature are affected by the natural causal laws, humans are, however, an exception to the rigid causation that takes place in nature. This means that for an adherent of soft determinism, humans are entirely responsible for their moral actions, as they are not in any way affected by the causation in nature. In other words, when, as humans, we are confronted with a good action and a bad action, the freedom to choose to do either of the two resides entirely with us, and therefore, whatever we choose to do is a product of our free will. Compatibilism. While both hard determinism and soft determinism deny any form of harmony between determinism and free will, compatibilism holds a possibility of this. Advocates of compatibilism seek to reconcile determinism with freedom and moral responsibility. According to compatibilism, it is a fact that people are predetermined to act in a particular way, howbeit by their individual personal character, but that it is also a fact that people are free to act without the presence of any external physical restraints. In this sense, according to compatibilism, people are both free and determined, and therefore both determinism and moral responsibility are correct. In this way, going by the view of compatibilism, every action is caused by our desires, expectations, ambitions, habits, and desires, rather than some external factors outside of us. Hence, it is believed that compatibilism is an improvement on hard determinism, which denies responsibility, and also improvement on soft determinism, which denies that actions are caused. Study session summary. In this study session, we focused on responsibility and determinations. We stated that the issue of moral responsibility is the issue of whether we can be justified in praising or blaming someone for a moral action is interconnected with the idea of whether or not the person freely chose to act the way she has acted. The foregoing is the basic concern of moral responsibility and determinism. We said that excusability as a concept in moral responsibility holds that given certain constraints, we cannot hold people responsible for wrongdoings. Hard determinism, soft determinism, and compatibilism, which are the different forms of determinism, hold different ideas about the relation of determinism to moral responsibility. We have now come to the end of study session 6. Thanks for listening.